The panel sparked again, a thin blue arc snapping across the edge of the circuit like it had a personal grudge against him. He leaned back just in time, squinting at it with the tired suspicion of someone who had been betrayed by machines too many times to trust anything that hummed politely. "Right," he muttered, wiping his hands on a cloth that had long ago given up pretending to be clean. "That was definitely intentional. You're doing this on purpose." The panel did not respond, which only confirmed his theory. The repair bay was unusually quiet for once. No shouting from the docking crews, no distant rumble of engines cycling through atmosphere protocols. Just the steady, almost comforting buzz of failing electronics and his own voice filling the gaps. He had learned to talk to broken things over the years, not because it helped, but because silence made him feel like the universe was waiting for something. He reached forward again, carefully adjusting a cluster of microconductors. The panel flickered, hesitated, then died completely. He stared at it. "I'm going to pretend that's progress," he said after a moment. Behind him, the door slid open with a soft mechanical sigh. He didn't turn immediately. Customers usually announce themselves loudly, with impatience or complaints or both. Whoever this was didn't say anything. That alone was suspicious. "You here to watch me fail?" he called out casually, still focused on the dead panel. "Or is there something actually broken that needs fixing?" No answer. He sighed, pushing himself upright and turning around, and then stopped. She stood near the entrance, motionless, observing the space with a quiet attentiveness that felt strangely out of place in a room filled with scattered tools and half-disassembled machinery. At first glance, she looked entirely human. Calm face, steady posture, eyes that seemed too focused for someone just walking into a repair bay. Then he noticed her ears, long, smooth, subtly curved, extending just beyond what would have been natural. If natural still meant anything in a place like this. He blinked once, then twice. "Okay," he said slowly. "Either I've been working too long, or you're not from around here." She tilted her head slightly as if considering how to respond. "Does that concern you?" "Only if you're here to return something," he replied, "because I definitely don't remember selling whatever dimension you came from." For a brief moment, there was no reaction. Then, unexpectedly, her lips curved into a faint smile. That caught him off guard more than the ears. "I'm not here to return anything," she said. "Good," he nodded, "because I have a strict no-refund policy, especially for alternate realities." She stepped further into the room, her gaze shifting from one piece of equipment to another, absorbing details with quiet precision. It wasn't curiosity exactly. It was evaluation. He watched her for a second, then gestured vaguely toward the workbench. "So, what's broken?" She paused before answering. "A navigation interface. It's unstable." "That's a polite way of saying it's completely useless," he said, already reaching for a toolkit. "Bring it here." She didn't move immediately. Instead, she looked at him, not casually, not impatiently, carefully. It was the kind of look people gave when they were trying to remember something they weren't sure they had ever known. He shifted slightly, suddenly aware of how long the silence had stretched. "You're doing that thing," he said. "What thing?" "The staring," he replied. "It's very advanced, very professional, but slightly unsettling." Another pause, then, quietly, "You seem familiar." He blinked, then let out a short laugh. "I get that sometimes, usually right before someone realizes they've mistaken me for someone more successful." "I don't think that's the case," she said. "Well," he shrugged, turning back to his tools, "if I owe you money, I'd appreciate you for getting that familiarity immediately." This time her smile came quicker. He didn't see it, but something in the room shifted. Not physically, not in any measurable way. Just a subtle change in the air, like a system recalibrating to a frequency it hadn't detected in years. She finally stepped closer, placing a small device on the workbench. Sleek, compact, its surface faintly illuminated by patterns that didn't quite follow any standard design he recognized. He leaned over it, examining the interface. "All right, this is either very advanced or very broken." "Both," she said. "Excellent," he nodded. "My favorite combination." He began working, fingers moving with practiced ease, but his attention wasn't entirely on the device. Every now and then, he glanced at her, subtly as if checking whether she was still there. She was, watching him, still with that same quiet intensity. "Just so you know," he said after a moment, adjusting a circuit line, "if you're waiting for me to suddenly reveal I know what I'm doing, that's not how this works. It's more of a gradual discovery process." "I see," she replied. "Sometimes even I'm surprised," he added. A faint sound escaped her, almost a laugh, but softer, as if it wasn't used often. He paused briefly, then continued working. Neither of them spoke for a while after that, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. And though he couldn't explain why, a strange thought lingered at the edge of his mind, just out of reach, like a memory that refused to fully form. As if this moment, this place, this person, had already happened once before. He didn't realize how quiet the room had become until the device in his hands emitted a low, irritated hum, like it was clearing its throat to remind him it still existed. "Right. Sorry," he murmured, tapping the side of it lightly. "Didn't mean to ignore your emotional needs." The surface flickered in response, patterns shifting into a brief, chaotic pulse before stabilizing again. "Dramatic," he added. She was still watching him, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that made it impossible not to notice. It wasn't just curiosity. There was something else beneath it, something measured, patient, almost cautious. "You always talk to machines like that?" she asked. "Only the difficult ones," he replied without looking up. "If I'm polite, they break faster. I've tested it extensively. And this one?" He tilted his head, inspecting the inner layer of the device. "This one is pretending to cooperate while secretly planning to ruin my day. That sounds intentional." "Oh, it is," he said. "Everything is intentional when it goes wrong." A faint pause followed, then softer. "You're not surprised." He glanced at her briefly. "About what?" She gestured lightly toward the device. "Its structure, its design." He shrugged. "Should I be? It's not standard." "Nothing that comes through that door is standard," he replied. "Last week someone brought me a cooling unit that screamed when you turned it on. Not a sound effect. Actual screaming. I didn't even fix it. I just apologized and gave it back." That earned him another small reaction from her. Not quite laughter, but closer this time. He returned his focus to the device, carefully adjusting a filament line. The interface pulsed again, this time smoother, more responsive. Whatever language it was using, it was beginning to make sense to him. Not logically, not in a way he could explain, but instinctively. That part bothered him. He ignored it. "So," he said, keeping his tone casual, "where'd you get this thing?" "A long way from here." "That narrows it down to everywhere," he nodded. "Helpful." She didn't elaborate. Instead, she stepped slightly closer, her attention shifting from him to the device itself. The faint glow reflected in her eyes, highlighting something unreadable in her expression. "You understand it," she said. It wasn't a question. He hesitated for half a second, just enough to notice it himself. "I understand that it's trying very hard to confuse me," he replied, "which means I'm winning." "That's not what I meant." "Then I'm definitely winning," he said. Another pause. He could feel it again. That strange sensation, like something aligning just out of sight. The patterns on the device shifted under his touch, responding faster now, almost anticipating his movements. He frowned slightly. "That's new," he muttered. "What is?" "It's adapting," he said. "Or I am. One of us is getting smarter, and I'm not comfortable with either option." She studied him more closely now. "Does that happen often?" she asked. He gave a short laugh. "If it did, I'd charge more." But the truth was, no, it didn't. Not like this. He adjusted another connection, and the device responded instantly, its interface stabilizing into a steady, coherent pattern. For a brief moment, the symbols aligned in a way that felt almost familiar. Too familiar. His hand paused. "Huh? What is it?" He shook his head slightly. "Nothing, just felt like I'd seen that before." Her posture changed, almost imperceptibly. "Where?" He leaned back, thinking. "I don't know. Somewhere. or nowhere. You ever get that feeling? Like your brain is trying to remember something it didn't bother to store properly? Yes, she said quietly. He nodded. Yeah, annoying, right? Like having a file name, but no file. He expected her to move on, to let it pass like a meaningless comment. She didn't. Instead, she asked, "Do you remember places?" "Sometimes," he shrugged. "Mostly the ones that didn't try to kill me. And the ones that didn't. Those are harder," he admitted. "They tend to blur together. Why?" She didn't answer immediately. He glanced at her, noticing the slight tension in her expression. Not fear, not uncertainty. Expectation. He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how still the room had become again. "Well," he said, forcing a lighter tone, "if you're trying to figure out if I've secretly been to some mysterious, important location, I regret to inform you I mostly go where I'm told and forget it immediately after." "That's unfortunate," she said. "Very," he agreed. "I could have been a legend by now." This time she did smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. He finished the final adjustment, and the device emitted a soft, stable glow. No flickering, no resistance. It was working. "There," he said, stepping back slightly. "Either I fixed it, or I've made it someone else's problem. Hard to tell at this stage." She looked down at the device, then back at him. "You fixed it." "Good," he nodded. "I prefer that version." She didn't move to take it immediately. Instead, she held his gaze. Longer than necessary, longer than comfortable, and yet not uncomfortable. "You really don't remember," she said. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't disappointed. It was certain. He frowned slightly, caught off guard by the tone. "Remember what?" She hesitated, just for a moment. Then quietly, "Nothing?" He narrowed his eyes. "That sounded like something." "It wasn't," she said. "Right," he nodded slowly. "Because people always say nothing when it's definitely nothing." She didn't respond. Instead, she finally reached for the device, her fingers brushing against the surface with familiarity that went beyond ownership. He watched her, a strange thought forming again at the edge of his mind. Not clear enough to understand, not strong enough to grasp. Just there, persistent. As she turned to leave, he spoke without thinking. "Hey!" She paused, glancing back. "If it breaks again," he said, "try not to wait 9 years before bringing it back." The words slipped out casually, effortlessly, like a joke. But the moment they settled into the air, something changed. Her expression stilled, completely. For the first time since she had entered the room, she looked shaken. He blinked, confused. "What?" She stared at him for a second longer, searching his face as if trying to find something hidden beneath it. Then, without answering, she turned and walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft, final sound. He stood there, frowning slightly. "Okay," he muttered to himself. "That was either a very bad joke or a very good one." He wasn't sure which, but for reasons he couldn't explain, the number lingered in his mind. 9. Like it meant something, like it always had. The repair bay felt different after she left. Not quieter. It had always been quiet. But something had shifted, like a frequency had been introduced and then abruptly cut off, leaving behind a faint echo his mind couldn't quite process. He stood there for a while, staring at the door as if it might explain itself. 9 years, he muttered under his breath. He scratched the back of his head, then shook it off with a short breath. No, that was just a joke. A very specific, oddly timed joke, but still a joke. The panel behind him sparked again. He turned slowly. "You saw that, right?" The panel remained unhelpfully silent. "Of course you did," he nodded. "And you chose not to intervene? Typical." He went back to work, but his movements lacked their usual rhythm. His hands were steady, practiced, but his thoughts kept drifting, circling back to the same moment, the same word. 9. It wasn't just the number. It was the way she had reacted. He had seen surprise before, confusion, even fear. That wasn't it. That had been recognition. He exhaled slowly, leaning against the edge of the workbench. "All right," he said to no one in particular. Let's assume for a second that I accidentally said something meaningful. The panel flickered faintly. Don't encourage me, he added. He grabbed a small scanner from the table and activated it, sweeping it across the damaged circuitry. The readout displayed a familiar cascade of errors. Nothing unusual, nothing he couldn't handle. But his attention wasn't fully there. It kept slipping. Back to her. Back to the way she had looked at him. Back to the quiet certainty in her voice when she said he didn't remember. Well, of course I don't remember, he muttered. I barely remember what I had for breakfast. And I was there for that? He paused, frowning slightly. I think. The scanner beeped sharply, pulling him back. Right, he said, focusing again. Work, important, tangible. Not mysterious alien encounters that may or may not involve forgotten pasts. He adjusted the panel's internal wiring, sealing a fractured connection with a quick, practiced motion. The system hummed back to life, stable this time. There, he said. See? Normal problem. Normal solution. No existential questions required. The door slid open again. He froze. Slowly, deliberately, he turned. It wasn't her. A cargo handler stepped in, carrying a dented stabilization unit that looked like it had been through at least 3 minor wars. Hey, the handler said. This thing's making a noise I don't like. He blinked once, then nodded. That's a very specific category of problem. Does it scream? No. Whisper threats? No. Then we're already ahead of last week, he said, gesturing for the unit. Put it down. The handler complied, glancing around the bay briefly. You all right? You look like you've been thinking. He grimaced. I try not to make a habit of it. Dangerous territory, the handler nodded knowingly. Extremely. He got to work on the stabilization unit, grateful for the distraction. The mechanical familiarity grounded him, pulling his focus back into something predictable. But even as he worked, the thoughts didn't fully disappear. They lingered at the edges, persistent, uninvited. Hey, the handler said after a moment. You ever get that feeling like you forgot something important? He paused, just for a fraction of a second. Define important, he replied carefully. Something that would probably explain why your life suddenly doesn't make sense, the handler said. He let out a short laugh. That's a very high standard. My life hasn't made sense for years. Yeah, but this would be different, the handler continued. Like something specific, something you should remember, but don't. He adjusted a component, tightening it more than necessary. No, he said lightly. Can't say I have. The handler shrugged. Lucky you. Very, he agreed. They worked in silence for a bit after that, but the question stayed, sharp, uncomfortable. He finished the repair quickly, handing the unit back with a nod. Try it now. The handler activated it. The machine hummed smoothly, stable and quiet. No screaming, the handler said. No whispering threats? He asked. None. Perfect. That'll be extra. The handler rolled his eyes, paid, and left. The door closed, and just like that, the room was quiet again. He stood there for a moment, staring at nothing in particular. Then slowly he reached for a small console near the back of the bay. Let's try something, he murmured. He activated the system, pulling up old logs, travel records, maintenance reports, anything that might hint at where he had been over the past decade. The data loaded slowly, lines of information scrolling past, stations, routes, assignments, nothing unusual, nothing that stood out. He frowned, scrolling further. Come on, he muttered. There's got to be something. Then, a gap, not an error, not a corrupted file, just missing. A stretch of time with no recorded activity. He stared at it. That's not normal. He tapped the screen, trying to expand the data. Nothing. No explanation. No trace. Just empty space where something should have been. He leaned back slightly, the faintest hint of unease settling in. All right, he said quietly. That's new. For a moment he considered ignoring it, closing the system, pretending it didn't exist. He almost did. Then he remembered her face, the way she had looked at him, the certainty in her voice. You really don't remember. He exhaled slowly. No, he admitted under his breath. I really don't. The console flickered faintly, as if reacting to the weight of the moment. He stared at the gap again, and for the first time the thought didn't feel distant. It felt immediate. Whatever had happened 9 years ago wasn't just forgotten, it had been erased. He didn't sleep much that cycle, not because he couldn't, but because every time he closed his eyes, his mind tried to organize something that refused to be organized. It wasn't memories, not exactly. It was more like impressions, shapes without edges, conversations without sound, a presence that felt familiar in a way he couldn't justify. At some point, he gave up on sleep entirely and went back to the repair bay. "If I can't fix my brain," he muttered, stepping inside, "I can at least fix something that deserves it." The lights flickered on automatically, illuminating the scattered tools and half-finished work. Everything looked exactly as he had left it. That was reassuring, predictable, safe. He walked over to the console again, pulling up the same logs, the same empty stretch of time. He stared at it like it might get uncomfortable and fill itself in. It didn't. "You're really committed to this, aren't you?" he said. The console, like everything else lately, refused to cooperate conversationally. He leaned closer, scanning the data again, this time looking for patterns around the gap. Entry points, exit points, anything that might suggest what had been removed. Nothing obvious, which in itself was obvious. Whoever did this, he murmured, knew what they were doing. That thought should have been more concerning than it was. Instead, it felt expected. He straightened slightly, rubbing his eyes. All right, new plan. Less staring, more doing. He tapped into a deeper diagnostic layer, one he didn't usually access unless something was very wrong or very expensive, or both. "Let's see if you're hiding anything interesting," he said. The system hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before allowing access. "That's not suspicious at all," he added. Lines of encrypted data appeared, most of it routine, layered behind standard security protocols. He navigated through it carefully, bypassing what he could, ignoring what he couldn't. Then, a marker, small, subtle, almost invisible. He leaned in. "Well, hello." It wasn't labeled. It didn't belong to any known system classification. It just existed. Sitting there, embedded in the gap like a quiet admission that something had been deliberately placed there. He reached out, hesitating only briefly before activating it. The screen flickered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lights in the room dimmed slightly. Not a full shutdown, just enough to notice. "Now that's never a good sign," he muttered. The console shifted, its interface reorganizing into something unfamiliar. The usual structure was gone, replaced by a single pulsing symbol that he didn't recognize, but somehow understood. His breath slowed. That's not possible. Because he knew it, not logically, not in a way he could explain. But he knew it, like a word on the tip of his tongue that had always been there. Before he could react, the symbol expanded, unfolding into a cascade of fragmented visuals. A corridor, metallic, dimly lit. A voice, faint, distant. "You can't stay here." Another voice, closer. "I won't leave you." The image distorted. He stepped back instinctively, his hand gripping the edge of the workbench. "Okay," he said, his voice quieter now. "That's new." The visuals flickered again, stabilizing briefly. A figure, standing across from him, not clear enough to fully see, but close enough. Long ears. His chest tightened. "No," he whispered. The image shifted, trying to resolve, but something resisted it, like the memory itself was incomplete, broken apart by whatever had erased it. Then, a sudden spike of interference. The console glitched violently, the symbol collapsing in on itself before the entire system snapped back to its original interface. Silence. The lights returned to normal. Everything looked exactly the same, except it wasn't. He stood there, breathing slowly, trying to process what had just happened. That was definitely not in the manual," he said after a moment. His hand remained on the workbench, fingers slightly tense. That had been real, not a dream, not imagination, a memory, or at least part of one. He looked back at the console, half expecting it to react, to acknowledge what had just occurred. It didn't. Of course, he muttered. Now you decide to behave normally. He straightened, running a hand through his hair. All right, he said, more to himself than anything else. Let's review. He started pacing slowly, the familiar rhythm helping him think. I have missing time. Suspiciously missing. Not forgot where I put my tools missing. More like someone edited my life missing. He stopped, glancing at the console. I have a device I shouldn't understand. That I understood. Another step. I have an alien woman who looks at me like I'm a very important mistake. He paused again. And I apparently know how long she's been doing that without knowing why. He exhaled. Great. Perfect. Completely normal situation. He leaned back against the workbench, staring at the ceiling. For a moment, he considered walking away, ignoring all of it, going back to fixing broken panels and pretending that was the most complicated thing in his life. He almost convinced himself. Then, the door slid open. He didn't turn immediately. Please tell me something is broken, he said, preferably something that doesn't involve my past. No response. He closed his eyes briefly. And that's not a good sign. He turned. She was there, standing in the same place as before. But this time, there was no hesitation in her expression, no uncertainty, only focus. You accessed it, she said. It wasn't a question. He blinked once. That depends, he replied carefully. On what it is. Her gaze didn't waver. The marker. He stared at her for a second, then let out a slow breath. You're going to have to be a little more specific, he said, because I accessed several things that probably shouldn't exist. She stepped closer. You saw something, she said. He hesitated just briefly. Then quietly, yeah. The air between them shifted again. Not tense, not hostile, just heavy. What did you see? She asked. He studied her for a moment. Then with a faint, almost reluctant smile, he said, honestly? A small pause. I think I saw the part where I made a very bad decision. For the first time, she didn't react with calm. Her expression cracked, just slightly, and that was enough for him to know. Whatever he had forgotten mattered more than he had ever realized. He watched her carefully, trying to decide whether he had just stepped into something dangerous or something inevitable. Possibly both. Well, he said after a moment, folding his arms loosely, you look like you were expecting that answer. I was hoping you wouldn't reach it yet, she replied. That's comforting, he nodded. I always enjoy being ahead of schedule in situations I don't understand. She didn't smile this time. That alone told him enough. He pushed himself off the workbench and took a few slow steps, circling slightly. Not away from her, but not directly toward her either. It was the kind of movement that gave him space to think without making it obvious he needed it. You left something in my system, he said. Did you know that? Yes. Good, he exhaled. I was worried I accidentally installed a mysterious alien memory package. She didn't respond to the joke. He stopped pacing. Okay, he added more quietly. That was definitely you, right? Yes. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face. There was no hesitation, no attempt to deny it, just quiet acceptance. All right, he said. Next question. A small pause. Why? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at him, as if measuring how much of the truth he could carry without it collapsing everything. You asked me to, she said finally. He blinked. I did what? You asked me to erase it. The words didn't land all at once. They settled slowly, like something heavy being placed carefully into position. No, he said almost instinctively. That doesn't sound like something I would do. You were very certain, she replied. That makes it worse, he muttered. He ran a hand over his face, trying to organize his thoughts, but they kept slipping, rearranging themselves into something that didn't quite fit. Let me get this straight, he said, lowering his hand. At some point, I meet you. Something happens. And my brilliant solution is, you know what would improve this situation? Forgetting everything. Yes. He stared at her. That's incredibly irresponsible of me. You had a reason. I'm sure I did, he nodded. I'm very good at convincing myself I have reasons. She took a step closer, her voice quieter now. It wasn't impulsive. That's even worse, he said. Impulsive would at least be on brand. For a brief moment, something softened in her expression. Not quite amusement, but close. He noticed it. Careful, he said. If you start smiling, I might think this situation isn't completely terrible. It isn't, she said. He raised an eyebrow. I'm missing 9 years of context. There's a hidden memory system in my console, and apparently I made a life-altering decision I don't remember. I'd say we're at least in moderately terrible territory. She didn't argue. Instead, she asked, Do you remember anything at all? He hesitated. Pieces, he admitted. Not clear, just flashes. Tell me. He exhaled slowly, leaning back against the workbench again. There was a corridor, he said. Metal, dim lighting, not exactly welcoming. She nodded slightly. There were voices, he continued. Yours, I think, and mine. A faint shift in her posture. You were arguing, he added. Or not arguing. More like insisting. On what? He frowned, trying to grasp the edges of it. I don't know, he said. It's like trying to remember a dream you didn't want to wake up from. Silence stretched between them. Not empty this time. Just careful. Then he glanced at her, a thought forming. Did I at least say something impressive? He asked. If I'm going to erase my memory, I'd like to believe I did it in a dramatic, heroic way. Her gaze held his. You said you didn't trust yourself to make the right choice. He blinked. That wasn't the answer he expected. That's not heroic at all, he said. No, she agreed softly. It wasn't. He looked away briefly, staring at the console as if it might offer a better version of events. I must have been having a really bad day, he muttered. You were, she said. He let out a short breath. Good. At least I'm consistent. Another pause. Then more quietly. What was the choice? She didn't answer. Not immediately. Instead, she took another step closer, closing the distance between them until there was no longer any space for casual conversation, only honesty. You were going to leave, she said. He frowned. Leave what? Everything, she replied. The words settled heavily. That's vague, he said after a moment. I tend to leave places all the time. It's one of my few talents. This was different. Of course it was, he sighed. Why wouldn't it be? She held his gaze unwavering. You were going to leave me. The air shifted. Completely. He didn't joke this time. Didn't deflect. Didn't look away. He just stood there processing it. And I decided the best solution was to forget you? He said finally. Her voice was steady, but there was something fragile beneath it. You said it would be easier. He let out a slow breath. Was I right? A small pause. Then quietly, no. That answer lingered longer than anything else. He nodded once, absorbing it. Yeah, he said. That sounds like me. She frowned slightly. It does? Making a complicated situation worse in a very creative way, he said. Absolutely. That earned him the faintest reaction from her, a small, reluctant shift at the corner of her lips. He noticed. Good, he said softly. I was worried I'd lost that part of myself too. Silence returned, but it felt different now, less uncertain, more grounded. He looked at her again, really looked this time, not as a stranger, not as a mystery, but as someone who had been part of something he had chosen to forget. You've been looking for me for 9 years, he said. Yes. And when you finally find me, he added, I have no idea who you are. Yes, he let out a breath, shaking his head slightly. That's impressively unfair. I know. He studied her for a moment longer. Then quietly, why didn't you just tell me? I am telling you, she said. He tilted his head slightly. You know what I mean. A pause. Then she said, because I didn't know if you would want to remember. He considered that, really considered it. Then after a moment he said, I don't. She didn't react immediately, but something in her expression stilled. Not broken, not surprised, just still. He held her gaze. then added softer, I want to understand it. She didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't understand him, but because she understood him too well. He watched her carefully, waiting for something. Resistance, disagreement, anything. But she only studied him in that same quiet, deliberate way that had started to feel less like scrutiny and more like recognition. That's different, she said finally. From what? He asked. From what you said before. He let out a short breath. Yeah, well, I've had some time to think, which historically has never improved my decisions, but we're trying something new. That earned him the faintest shift in her expression again. He took it as a victory. So, he continued, gesturing lightly toward the console, let's say I don't want the memories back all at once. No dramatic collapse, no sudden identity crisis, no, oh wow, I was a completely different person moment. That's not how it works, and she said. Of course it isn't, he nodded. That would be too convenient. He stepped closer to the console, tapping it lightly as if it might cooperate out of politeness. I just want to understand what kind of person makes that choice, he added, because right now I don't like him very much. You should. He glanced at her. That sounded suspiciously confident. It is. Good, he said, because I'm currently reviewing his decisions, and they're not scoring highly. She moved closer, her gaze shifting to the console. You're judging him without knowing what he was facing. I'm judging him because he erased his memory, he replied. That's a strong opening statement. He did it to protect you. He blinked. From what? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached past him, her fingers brushing the edge of the console as she activated something hidden beneath the surface. The interface flickered, then shifted, just slightly, but enough to signal that whatever she had done, it wasn't part of the standard system. You didn't see everything, she said. That's comforting, he muttered. I was worried I accidentally uncovered the entire mystery in one go. She ignored the comment, her focus steady. There are layers, she continued. What you accessed was only the first. He leaned against the edge of the console, folding his arms again. Of course there are layers. It wouldn't be a proper problem without layers. She glanced at him briefly. Do you want to see more? He hesitated, not out of fear, but out of awareness, because this time it wouldn't be accidental. This time it would be a choice. So define more, he said. Fragments, she replied. Controlled. Not enough to overwhelm you. And what's the worst-case scenario, he asked. She met his gaze directly. You remember something you regret forgetting. He exhaled slowly. That's already happening, he admitted. A quiet pause followed. Then he straightened slightly, nodding once. All right, let's do it. She didn't move immediately. You're sure? No, he said. But I've decided that's not a requirement anymore. For a brief moment, something in her expression softened again. Then she activated the console. The room dimmed, not as sharply as before, but enough to shift the atmosphere. The interface dissolved into that same unfamiliar pattern, the symbol returning, pulsing faintly. He tensed slightly but didn't step back this time. Okay, he murmured. I remember this part. This is where things get concerning. The symbol expanded again, but slower now, more controlled. Images began to form, not chaotic this time. Structured, a room, different from the repair bay, brighter, cleaner. He was there. He felt it immediately, not as a clear image, but as a presence. Himself standing in that space, moving, speaking. This is strange, he muttered. I don't remember it, but I know exactly where I'm standing. That's because you were there, she said quietly. Very helpful, he replied. The scene shifted. She was there too, closer this time, not distant, not observing, standing directly in front of him. The version of him in the memory looked different, not physically, but in the way he held himself, more certain, more aware. I don't like him, he said under his breath. You said that already. Just confirming, he replied. The memory continued, voices clearer now. You don't understand what this means, her voice said. I do, his voice answered. That's why I'm making this choice. He flinched slightly. That's definitely me, he said. I recognize that tone. That's my, I'm about to do something questionable voice. She didn't react. Her attention was fixed on the memory. You can't just erase it, her voice continued. It's not something you can undo. I'm not trying to undo it, his voice said. I'm trying to stop it. The scene flickered slightly. He leaned forward instinctively. Stop what? He asked, even though he knew the memory wouldn't answer. But something shifted. The image responded, not with clarity, but with pressure, like it was trying to push further, but couldn't. The console pulsed harder. She stepped closer, placing her hand over his. Careful, she said. I'm fine, he replied, though his voice was tighter now. The memory strained again. If you stay, his voice said, distorted slightly, it won't affect me. The image fractured. A flash, light, movement, something large, distant, impossible to fully grasp. He inhaled sharply. Okay, he said. That's new, I don't like that. The console flickered violently for a brief second. Then, everything stopped. The room snapped back to normal. Silence. He stood there, breathing slowly, his hand still beneath hers. Well, he said after a moment, that was informative. She didn't move her hand immediately. What did you feel? She asked. He stared at the console, his thoughts trying to catch up. Like I was about to ruin something, he said. A small pause. Or save it, he added. Her grip tightened slightly. That's closer. He let out a breath, pulling his hand back gently. Yeah, he said. I was afraid of that. He looked at her again, this time differently. Not as a stranger, not as a mystery, but as someone standing on the edge of something he had already chosen once. Whatever I was trying to stop, he said quietly, it wasn't small, was it? She shook her head. No. He nodded slowly. Figures, he muttered. Then after a brief pause, he added, I really need to stop making decisions like that. He didn't touch the console again, not immediately. For once, he allowed the silence to stay exactly as it was, unfixed, unresolved, present. That wasn't just about leaving, was it? He said after a while. She stood across from him, still, composed but no longer distant. No, she replied. He nodded slowly. Good, because I'm starting to feel like I owe past me an apology and also a serious conversation. A faint breath of something almost like amusement passed through her expression. You wouldn't listen, she said. That sounds accurate, he admitted. I barely listened to present me. He glanced back at the console, then away again, as if deciding something quietly. So you said I was trying to stop something, he continued, not undo it. Yes. And if I stayed, he added, recalling the fragmented words, it would affect more than just me. Yes. He let that sit. Then he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. All right, he said. Let's make this simple. As much as anything in this situation can be simple. She watched him, waiting. He looked at her, directly this time. What happens if I remember everything? He asked. A small pause. Then honestly, you might make the same choice again. He blinked. That's not encouraging. It's the truth. He nodded slowly. Okay. Next question, he said. What happens if I don't? She held his gaze. Then you'll choose without knowing why. He let out a quiet breath. That's worse. Yes. He looked down briefly, then back at her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said almost casually, You've been carrying this for 9 years. Yes. And you still came back, he added. Yes. He tilted his head slightly, studying her in a way that no longer felt uncertain. That doesn't sound like someone who thinks I made the wrong choice, he said. She hesitated, just slightly. Then, I think you made the only choice you believed you had. He nodded, but not necessarily the right one. No. He let out a short breath, then smiled faintly. Good, he said. That means I get to fix it. She frowned slightly. It's not something you can fix. He shrugged. Everything is something I can attempt to fix. Success is optional. That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be, he replied. He stepped closer to the console again. But this time, he didn't activate anything. He just stood there thinking. "You said I didn't trust myself," he said. "Yes." He nodded. "Yeah, that sounds like me." A brief pause, then he added, "But I think I was wrong." She stilled. He turned to face her fully. "I don't need to remember everything to make a different choice," he said. Her expression shifted, something fragile surfacing beneath her calm. "You don't know what you're choosing," she said. "I know enough," he replied. "That's not the same." "No," he agreed, "it's not." He took a step closer, not rushed, not uncertain, just decided. "I know that I left," he said. "I know that I thought it was the best option, and I know that it cost you 9 years. Her gaze didn't waver. "And?" she asked. "And," he continued, his voice steady now, "I know that if I walk away again, whether I remember why or not, it's going to be for the same reason." A small silence followed. Then she said quietly, "And what reason is that?" He smiled faintly. "Fear," he answered. The words settled between them. Not heavy, not sharp, just clear. "I was trying to control something I didn't understand," he added. "So I removed the part of me that was connected to it." He gestured lightly between them. "That part." She didn't speak, didn't move. He took another step closer. "Turns out," he said, "that was a terrible strategy." That earned him the smallest reaction from her, a breath that almost became a laugh. He noticed. "Good," he said softly. "We're making progress." Then more seriously, "I don't know what happens if I stay," he said. "I don't know what I was trying to stop, and I don't know if past me was right about any of it." He paused, then finished. "But I do know I don't want to make the same choice again just because it feels safer." The silence returned, but this time it wasn't uncertain. It was resolved. She studied him, searching, not for memory, not for proof, but for something else. Consistency, truth. And slowly something in her expression changed. Not relief, not quite, but something close to it. "You've changed," she said. He considered that. "I've had a very strange day," he replied. "That's not what I mean." "I know," he said. He glanced briefly at the console one last time, then stepped away from it, deliberately. "I don't need it," he added. Her gaze followed him. "You're sure?" "No," he said again. Then after a small pause, "But I trust myself a little more now." That was new. He could feel it. Not certainty, not confidence, just willingness. And for him, that was enough. She took a step closer. This time there was no distance left between them, no hesitation, no searching. "You stayed," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "Yeah," he replied. "Took me long enough, right?" For the first time since he had met her, she laughed. Not softly, not restrained, but genuinely. And the sound of it felt like something that had been waiting a very long time to exist again. He watched her, then shook his head slightly. "All right," he said. "Now I'm definitely not leaving. I need to hear that again." She looked at him, something warm finally settling into her expression. "You will," she said. He nodded. "Good." A small pause. Then he added, "Just maybe without the memory erasure next time." Her smile lingered. "That would be preferable." He glanced around the repair bay, at the scattered tools, the half-finished work, the ordinary space that suddenly didn't feel quite so small anymore. Then he looked back at her. "So," he said, "what happens now?" She held his gaze, and for the first time, there was no uncertainty in her answer. "Now," she said, "we begin again, and